How you doing? I'm Mike Hsu, middays here at WAAF, and this is the Road to Legalization, where we talk about basically the progress on the legalization of marijuana here in Massachusetts. And today we have Mr. Richard Evans, or do you prefer Dick?
Dick?
Dick Evans here, who is you are the author of Bill 1632. Is that correct?
That's right.
And this is a bill that proposes the legalization of marijuana here in Massachusetts. And just to get a little background about you, Dick, the author of this bill, how long have you been involved in the efforts to legalize marijuana here in Massachusetts?
Oh, longer than I'd like to admit. I came to Massachusetts from Florida, actually, in the 70s, and started law practice in the Pioneer Valley, the Amherst, Northampton area, where I remain and still practicing there. I got involved with the NORML and with what there was at that point of the marijuana. We didn't call it legalization movement. We didn't dare use the L word in those days. But the marijuana policy reform group, we could say. And then it occurred to me that, no one was talking about legalization. No one was talking about regulation and taxation, and treating cannabis like a commodity like it ought to be. And it was, people were only talking about how harsh can the laws be toward its users and possessors. So it occurred to me, and in a naive moment, that perhaps the reason that no one was talking about legalization, and by legalization I mean regulation and taxation, that no one had ever really demonstrated how a legalization scheme might work. So I undertook to write this bill. It was modeled on the alcohol regulation bill, the Alcohol Beverages Act, and I spent a couple of weeks writing it, and then was looking for a way to get it introduced. And my purpose in writing it was not to suggest that this is the end-all and be-all of marijuana policy, but rather to stimulate discussion about whether, and if so, how marijuana ought to be regulated as opposed to prohibited. And I was able to communicate with a young Republican progressive legislator from Holbrook named Andy Card, who went on to become the
Andrew
first
Card.
President Bush's chief of staff. But back in those days, these were the safe 70s when you could talk about marijuana, and well, somewhat, if you were really progressive. And so he introduced the bill not as his own legislation, but rather as a citizen petition. All citizens have the right to introduce legislation in the legislature. And so it got introduced, and I received a notice in the mail that the hearing was coming up in a few weeks, and I assembled a few friends, and we piled in a car and drove down to Boston and came into the State House, and we were greeted by this army of anti-drug crusaders. I mean, just seemed like over 100 people, mostly parents with funny hats and badges, and they were just adamant about defeating this thing, and the room was just packed with these people. And so when the bill came, when the chairman called this bill, I stood up and I said a few things about it and had my say. And and then he said, "Does anybody want to speak against it?" And as you can expect, quite a few people did. And so he heard some testimony against it, and he looked at his watch and he said, "Oh, I think we've heard enough on this. All in favor say aye." Now, I wasn't expecting that.
Vote right there.
But both my friends and I, we jumped up and said aye. He said, "All opposed say nay." Well, the building shook. There was a roar that said you could hear it from extreme ends of the building. And bang went the gavel, and that was it for a legalization bill for about the next 30 years. But several sessions ago of the legislature, as a result, principally of the efforts of MassCan and other Massachusetts reform groups, a public policy question was put on the ballot in Hampshire County. That is, a non-binding measure. You've seen them on the ballots that say, should the representative or the senator from this district be instructed to vote in favor of something? And MassCan put a measure on the ballot there that instructed the state rep to introduce a legalization measure, and it passed by 65% or so. This is like 2010, I think, and so I knew the state rep, and I called her up and said, "Hey, I've got a bill," and I found my old bill and dusted it off, and she said, "Sure, I'll introduce it." And she did. Now, this was Ellen Story of Amherst. She's been very good about her duty, that is, to
Mm-hmm.
introduce it and say what needs to be done. She's not enthusiastic. She doesn't want to be identified with it, which is what I hear from a lot of politicians. I
Right.
support you, but I don't want to be identified with this issue.
Right. Still kind of afraid of the
We hear that
re-election thing.
totally,
Yeah.
totally, which is really bizarre, Mike, because for all these decades we've been doing this, we constantly hear politicians say, they usually lower their voice and say, if it were me, I'd support you in a heartbeat. Of course, it ought to be
Right.
legal, but I've got the next election to worry about.
Right.
The notion that marijuana is the third rail of politics, that is, touch it and you're dead, that may have been true 30, 40 years ago, or maybe as few as 20 years ago, but it's not anymore. And I just don't understand why more and more politicians don't embrace this cause,
Do you,
because it's good politics.
the even though it's kind of more widely accepted now these days, do you think it's still, the stigma is still there? It not just for local politicians here, but maybe if they want to go beyond being a local politician, they're still afraid of that. Is it the re-election thing that's keeping them back from voting the way they feel?
I think it is, but I think that their perception is incorrect. I think that if they were to embrace or actively support legalization, they would not be defeated at the next election. In fact, they would probably gain a lot of support. But why they don't see it that way is a mystery to me.
Do you think it has, I'm just speculating here, of course, is this maybe something to do with getting some kind of federal support or federal money because it's still illegal federally?
No, I think it's just inertia. All their careers, they've made a point to avoid this topic. I mean, I have said for years that the one thing that all politicians want when it comes to marijuana is to change the subject. And that's been their course for all these decades, for their entire career, and they just won't change horses midstream.
Right.
Cliche.
Do you think that now that there was a bipartisan coalition federally to block any kind of DEA raids on medicinal marijuana operations, do you think that'll help the efforts here locally in
Absolutely.
Massachusetts?
Absolutely. It'll help everywhere. That was a milestone. That was the milestone
pretty
of
huge.
the day.
Yeah.
It was huge.
And it was
what you're-
bipartisan. Yeah.
That's right. What you're talking about is the vote in Congress on an amendment to the Farm Bill, I believe, to deny federal funds for the support of raids on medical marijuana dispensaries in those states where they're legal. And it passed by a substantial margin. As you said, it was bipartisan, a remarkable occurrence. We're seeing these milestones every day practically. The landscape is changing so fast. It's hard to predict, what's going to happen tomorrow, but I think we can predict what's going to happen, several years from now. We are in a very awkward interval right now between prohibition and legalization. No one knows what they're doing.
Right. It's very, very new.
Very
It's-
new,
it's
very
in its
confusing.
infancy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're still learning how to walk.
I would say it's in our pubescence.
Oh, okay. Well, you're going to move along that.
That's
well,
right.
that's true. It's probably because I'm guessing it's because Colorado so far, and even though it's been a very short time, has been fairly successful. I think they've raised a lot of money. Revenue. Their operations seem to be getting more streamlined.
And the sky hasn't fallen.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't anything like anyone said. Now they're saying crime has gone down in Colorado.
In Denver.
I don't know if that's because of legalization. Do you think so? That's a direct result of legalization?
Who knows? Who knows? Give it a few more months, maybe a year, and the statisticians will come up with some numbers that we can count on. But the important thing is that the sky hasn't fallen. The revenue is coming in. The only adverse reports I'm hearing out of Colorado relate to edibles, and that's something that deserves a close look, because that's something that's new for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you saw this, but a couple of months ago, the head of the DEA was testifying before Congress, and one of the congressmen, I think it was Blumenauer, asked her what's been the impact, the fallout of legalization in Colorado, and she said, "Well, there's been a big spike in family pets, dogs and cats, being taken to the veterinarian. It seems they're getting into the
Oh, they're getting
brownies."
into the edible.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
Right.
And that's all she could cite in terms of
Right.
the impact, which I thought was pretty laughable.
Yeah. Let's get into 1632 here.
Sure.
Now, so this is you're proposing that everybody can possess marijuana legally. Is there a certain amount put upon that?
No. The 1632, which remember was written 33 years ago, before anybody ever heard of edibles, and before anybody had heard of a THC level over single digits.
Right.
It provides that a person can grow and have, an adult can have, as much as they want. They can't sell it. They can give it away. They can't sell it. That's how you distinguish. It's called a non-gratuitous
similar
transfers.
to beer.
Well, I think there are limits on how much beer you can brew
I think
in your
it's
bathtub, but
like,
it's pretty high.
It's pretty high
Yeah.
for one person.
Yeah.
I remember it's something like 30 kegs or something like that, and I can't imagine that. But would there be a limit? So you're saying this bill is saying you can grow and possess as much as you want.
Yeah.
Just as long as you don't sell it. What
That's
about
right.
like giving it away?
Give it away. Sure, you can give it away.
You can just share it with anyone.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds really nice.
Yeah. But if you want to go into the biz, you got to get a license.
Right.
You got to meet certain standards. It's got to be pure. It's got to be tested. Just like you were in the business of selling beverages or tomatoes, for that matter.
Right.
The
tomato.
agricultural rules.
Right.
You have to.
Or
keep in mind.
pharmaceutical, for that matter.
Especially pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. So let's get into the thing I'm interested in with this is it's going to create jobs and bring money into the state. So let's get into the tax part of this. Your bill says that you're going to tax $10 per 1% of THC. And, Chris, you know a little more about this, but it sounds like if you get some medium grade marijuana, it won't be too bad. But when you start getting into the higher grade stuff and some of the medicinal stuff, it may become quite expensive there.
Yes. Now, my bill contemplates that marijuana would be sold only in 1 ounce packages of loose material. It would be labeled with the source, the grower's identification. It would be certified as to being clean and pure. It would contain the label, recite the level of THC. So if you had a 1 ounce package of, say, 5% THC, the tax on that would be $50. And then obviously whatever the market bears is what the eventual sales price would be. And I think that we're going to see more and more people growing, but eventually I think consumers are going to rely on commercial cannabis for their supply and not backyards. I mean, everybody's going to have a cousin in the country,
right?
Of such, but I think, how many people do you know who brew their own beer or grow their own tobacco today?
Yeah.
We're going to rely on the industry,
right? Would that also apply to medicinal marijuana?
1632 doesn't make any allowance for medicinal marijuana. In fact, that was a topic no one had heard of in 1981 when this was written.
Yeah.
So I don't think it does.
Well, the concern I have would be that the tax would be so much that now I'm all for taxing this and getting revenue, but the tax would be so high that people that need that medicinal marijuana for whatever's ailing them, it would be too expensive, much like pharmaceuticals.
Sure.
And so is this could there be a whole separate tax bracket, I guess, for medicinal marijuana?
Totally. Look, we can do whatever we want to. It's whatever the legislature will consider and enact. The purpose of this bill, 1632, in 1981, and even to this day, is not to promulgate what I think is the right way to legalize or regulate and tax marijuana. It's simply one way to do it. But rather, it's to get the issue on the table, get people talking about it. When we talk about marijuana reform, we can talk about whether we ought to legalize. Well, I think that debate is over. We're past the tipping point on that. We can talk about when we ought to legalize. Well, that debate is over. As long as people are sitting in jail for marijuana, as they are to this day, or they're being punished, they're losing their jobs or their housing or their scholarships and such, then the time to legalize is now, if not yesterday. That only leaves the question of how do we legalize marijuana? And that's a question that lots of people can have an opinion on and should. Everyone should have a say in this. And I regret that the legislature and individual legislators aren't more interested in pursuing it themselves and examining various options and considering what's the best tax scheme, how do we best protect the public health and the public safety, how do we discourage use by minors. Those are the kinds of issues. Those are obviously the goals of prohibition as well, but prohibition didn't achieve them, but I think that regulation and taxation can. Those are the issues that we would invite everybody's input on.
Do you have ideas of where this tax money should go specifically? I know in Colorado, it goes to the schools, doesn't it? And then some of it goes to. Does some of it also go to like a rehabilitation program or
I think
treatment
so.
program, something like that?
I don't have a strong feeling about that. Do you? Where do you think it ought to go?
I think it should go to schools. It should go to infrastructure, and it should go to helping the medicinal marijuana industry and distribution in this state to help the people who need it as medicine. But I also think some of it should go to also to treatment, because I believe marijuana is something that can be abused, just like alcohol.
And anything else?
Yeah, and so I think some of it should go there also.
In the last couple of months, there's been all this talk about the opiate addiction problem. And it appears that people are getting hooked on pharmaceuticals. And then when their prescriptions run out, they're turning to heroin because they don't have another prescription and the heroin is cheaper. And I don't know if any of you guys attended those DPH listening sessions a year ago when they were undertaking to draw up the new medical marijuana rules. Excuse me. There was person after person who came. They talked about how marijuana helped them wean themselves off narcotics. It's an immensely helpful substance for breaking the addiction to narcotics. At least they testified. And I would think that the governor, who is proclaiming great concern about this epidemic, would reach out to the marijuana community and to medical marijuana itself and promote medical marijuana as an antidote to the heroin addiction problems. And I wrote him a letter and said that, but alas, I don't think he's interested in me. I didn't get a response.
Also in 1632, you talk about having a cannabis control authority. And ideally, who would you like to be in this authority? Like how many people would it be, and ideally, who would those people be? Because it seems like with the people at the Department of Public Health and who are in charge of medicinal marijuana, it seems like they hired some people that didn't really know anything about medicinal marijuana. So ideally, who would you have on the authority?
I would have people who know something about the topic and who are good managers, basically. I mean, every new bureaucracy needs a board of directors. Every enterprise, and this would be like the board of directors for the program. If I were to rewrite the bill today, maybe just putting the authority in the Department of Revenue would be sufficient, and we don't need a separate commission.
And also, you talk about you'd have to have a license to grow and sell, right?
Mm-hmm. Commercially, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, how who would be able to get these licenses? Who wouldn't? Like, if you had, a criminal past, could you still get one of these licenses, or would it depend on the kind of crime you had in your past?
Well, think about the lottery system. I think my bill probably most approaches the lottery model as legalization. Lots of people can get retailers' licenses. You've got to meet some minimum requirements, but think about it like that.
Okay. Also, I guess I want to kind of bring it to a close here. What drives your efforts? You've been doing this for such a long time, longer than anyone I know. What drives you to do this? Why do you put so much effort into this? Was it something that happened, or is it just you?
Well, I got started when I was in law school. I took a course in constitutional law, and I learned about constitutional rights, and I read the Bill of Rights. And I was having a really hard time squaring what I was reading in the law books with what I was seeing on the street and in the courtrooms. So many people being arrested for petty marijuana offenses. And I got interested in that. And one thing led to another. I joined Normal, started going to Normal conference. I met people, got involved in some fascinating issues. It's been a wonderful ride. I often tell people I've met the greatest people. As I said, I've been involved in fascinating issues and had a lot of fun. And I do it out of a sense of duty too, because I'm very fortunate that I can do it. I can do it because I'm self-employed, for one thing. I mean, if you go out and try to recruit activists for marijuana, most people will say, gee, I support you, but I couldn't possibly do this because my boss might hear about it, or my landlord, or
Right.
whatever. But I was fortunate enough to be self-employed, and I didn't have to worry about a boss. And if you look at who were the activists, many of the biggest activists in this whole movement are self-employed people, who don't have to answer to a boss. And so I had the opportunity to do it. And because no one else was doing this, I felt some sense of duty to it. This is something I could contribute to the cause and to the world I live in, and that's what drives us all, isn't
Right.
it? We all
Yeah.
want to we
Yeah.
always want to contribute
We
something,
all have a
and this
mission.
is something
Yeah.
that I could do. So I stepped forward, and I've done it.
Well, I appreciate your efforts in sticking with it, especially through a time in the 80s where it just looked impossible that something like legalization anywhere, even for medicinal marijuana, would happen in this country at all. Going through the war, the birth of the war on drugs with the Reagan era and all that. So I applaud your efforts. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, but I must say that the decrim election initiative in 2008 in Massachusetts was a big eye opener for me. You recall we had the initiative for decrim in Massachusetts. It passed by 68%. I was blown away by that statistic, and what it taught me was, for many, many years, activists have been talking about the necessity of educating the public. We need to educate people about marijuana. Well, in November of 2008, I realized, you know, it, education isn't what was necessary. What was necessary to move this project for this effort forward was to give voters the opportunity to express their true views about marijuana safely. And what that initiative did was give voters the opportunity to go into the privacy of a voting booth, close the curtain behind them, and for the first time ever say what they really thought about marijuana and marijuana policy. And they did that. And they did it again in 2012. And they'll do it again, I anticipate, in 2016 in Massachusetts as well as in a number of other states. So it was fear, not lack of education. It was fear that kept people silent for so long. And thanks to organizations like MassCan, who gave voters the opportunity to express their views, we're breaking through that finally.
How can people help your efforts? How can people help them the bill pass 1632?
Write or call their representative or senator. That's the
And
best
be
thing
nice
they can
about
do.
it, right?
Yes,
Be polite
sure,
about it. Yeah.
sure. Ask if they don't like 1632. What do they propose? Do they support prohibition or not? Now, I have found, as I said earlier, that of course most politicians just don't even want to talk about it at all. They want to duck the issue. But I can also tell you that the mood on Beacon Hill, oddly enough, is to welcome a 2016 legalization initiative because it saves them from having to take a position on it.
Right. They'll just say, well, the people wanted it.
Exactly. Let the
Right.
people decide. Now,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that's what's passing for leadership on Beacon Hill these days. And what's going to happen is the people will pass something, and it will be a measure that's drawn up not by policymakers, not aimed at protecting the public health and public safety and discouraging abuse and keeping it from minors. No, the bill will be fashioned in a sense to draw the highest number of voters. It will be vetted through focus groups, and it'll be run past consultants, and they'll come up with the funders, people who are writing the checks for this measure. Thank God for them. They will come up with a measure that is best calculated to succeed. Now, and then the legislators are going to be left to complain that the people shouldn't be making policies like this. But the people have to make policies like this if politicians and legislatures and policymakers refuse to. And so it's the public that's taken the leadership from the elected politicians in Massachusetts on this issue. And that's what we're going to have to continue to do. The public will remain in the leadership through 2016.
All right. Well, Dick Evans, author of Bill 1632 for the legalization of marijuana here in Massachusetts. Write your congressman, write your rep, write everyone, and show your support for this bill. Thank you very much for joining us.
For more exclusive on-demand video, keep checking in at WAAF.com.